Yeah, 8 hours ought to be fine. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you happen to be. And welcome to the long lost return of the Groovy Podcast.
I think we can call it season 2. We had a
Yeah,
break
season
and
two.
now we are.
Ooh,
Yeah,
that's a good idea. I like that.
here you go. Here you go.
My name is Ken Cousin, podcasting from Marlborough, Connecticut, and I'm joined by the ever popular.
I'm Barok Sadogurski, broadcasting from JFrog offices at Swamp Up in Sunnyvale, California.
I see you got a frog in the background there. Wow,
Yes, of
that's new.
course. Yeah, I
Yeah,
kind of
marketing.
been there for half a year, but we didn't have an episode for a very long time. So yeah.
Yeah, the place is actually starting to look like you look lived in, like you've been there a little while. That's pretty good.
I think let's see if you can see it. I have all my it's another camera.
That's all right.
Let's see. Yeah, no, I have all my badges from all the conferences now somewhere behind me. I don't see it. Never mind. It's a lot of pages.
That would be a lot. Yeah, I'll take your word for it.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, the next major thing coming up for me, I suppose, probably for you as well. I've got a no fluff event this weekend in Boston, but after that, I'm headed to Java One. I assume you are as well.
Of course,
Of
of
course.
course. Java 1.
What are you doing at Java One?
So unfortunately, I didn't get any Groovy talks accepted, Groovy per se, but I will incorporate Groovy into one of my talks. We're going to do a pair talk with Victor Gamov about implementing voice interfaces on Amazon Alexa and Google Home, and that's of course inspired a lot by the job Ryan does with Alexa in the Groovy community.
Hmm.
Uh, and we still didn't decide who will do what, but whether I will do Alexa or Google Home, I will write my extensions, my skills, my actions in Groovy, so that will be my Groovy contribution to Java 1. On top of that, I have a couple of DevOps talks, and a talk about developer relations at the developer relations pre-conference on Sunday.
Oh wow! So you're going to be very busy when you're there.
4 talks. That's kind of
Yeah,
uh,
I have three myself. Again, none of them are Groovy based. I've got one on Java concurrency, especially things like completable future and stuff in Java 8. I've got one on my modern Java recipes book that just came out in August, so it's based on that. I've also got a book signing for that, which will be great.
nice.
And then I've got one on design patterns in Java using lambdas and everything. And that, I got to be perfectly honest, that's basically based on Mario Fusco, his work.
Hmm.
Venkat has done talks on this sort of thing many times, but Mario Fusco did a series of blog posts that were really, really good about Java 8 lambdas and method references and how all that stuff ties into design patterns. And I put in a proposal, and when I got accepted, and he didn't have one, I thought, gee, that's strange. So I sent him an email and said, do you want to do one together or whatever? And he was like, no, that's fine. But I told him I'm probably going to reference his work, and it feels like half of what I do is I feel I play the role of curator, just like on the podcast, where I'm not really doing things as original as saying, hey, wait a minute, this is really interesting. You ought to be aware of this, that, and the other. As long as I feel like I guess it's okay as long as I give credit,
I don't know if I mentioned, but whatever I do at Java 1 is actually Ryan's work. So we're on the same. We are here exactly the same. Yeah. So I think we popularize others people work, and as you mentioned, it's fine as long as we give proper credit.
Well, I hope to do that anyway. Now, speaking of the groovy world, like you, I don't have anything groovy specifically at uh, Java 1. I will be looking to see if there's any groovy related talks and everything. I haven't really dug into it that much this year. But of course, it's been a while since we've done a Groovy podcast, so we do have a fair number of news items to discuss.
And the biggest one is the first alpha release of the new age in Groovy, what is modestly called Groovy 2.6, but I think should actually be Groovy 3, and that's the new Parrot parser and everything that comes with it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I haven't had a chance to try it myself. I tend to be very reluctant about adopting an alpha software or beta software, but I mean, according to what they've said in the release notes, it's got, I mean, in addition to the fact that it supports the Java 8 syntax for lambdas and method references, it also has the triple equals identity operator. It has try with resources, which I think I had forgotten Groovy didn't even support until now.
Yep.
It's got the controversial one, the Elvis assignment operator. You know, so it's question mark equals instead of question mark dot or the actual Elvis operator itself. It supports do while loops, which I always thought was amusing. You know, as the one piece of Java syntax that was never supported by Groovy. And then that whole idea of a not in or not instance of operator and something called safe indexing. I've never used safe indexing. You familiar with that one at all?
Yeah, so that's the idea of using the null safe operator for actually for indexes.
Okay.
That's something that we never had, right? It didn't work, and now it works, and it's kind of completes the null safety operator. But I think the biggest news are the support for Java closures.
Yeah, for
Right.
lambda expressions and method
Yes,
references. Absolutely.
exactly.
I mean,
This is the one thing that kind of gave a very bad name to Groovy since Java 8 was out, and kind of diverged Groovy syntax from Java syntax that we were so proud of the similarity.
Yeah, it's always been a point of pride that you could take Java code and rename it .groovy, and chances are it would compile. And as you say, with the Lambda syntax and the method references and everything, Groovy had, of course, analogous things. You could always use a Groovy closure where Java expected a functional interface, you know, a Lambda expression, and that worked fine. But it will be very pleasant to have the basic syntax available again. I don't know that it really impacted people's work in any significant way, but again, it is, as you say, a point of pride that we have the closest integration with Java that's got very similar syntax. Daniel's son, I assume it's pronounced son and not soon, I don't know for sure, but he's been working very hard on this stuff for quite some time, and that's really good news that he's made so much progress on it.
Absolutely, yes.
I don't know if they've changed plans for Groovy 3. I assume that when 2.6 comes out, the 3 will not be that far behind. But I don't know that, as with you, I assumed that there wasn't going to be a 2.6. I thought they were going to go directly from 2.5 to 3.0. But it appears they've changed their mind on that.
Yep, I agree.
Well,
so we'll see. I think that it's not been finalized whether it will be Groovy 3 or this one will be 2.6 and then Groovy 3 will be something else. But I still think that's the most important changes in Groovy since Groovy 2. So it's a big deal.
I'm looking forward to it. Of course, since we've done a podcast, Groovy 2.5 came out as well, at least as a beta. And the latest stable version at this point is 2.4.12, I believe, which is pretty much just bug fixes and updates. I've been using that in classes I've been teaching, and everything so far has been fine. I haven't tried the 2.5 or 2.6 versions at all yet.
Mm-hmm.
I do look forward to them. Also in the ecosystem, I've got Gradle to talk about and Grails to talk about. Gradle, you know, I'm starting to feel funny about talking about Gradle on the Groovy Podcast.
Yeah.
Because there's so little Groovy left, you know?
Groovy is still there, but nothing happens with it, I would say, right?
Well, it's certainly involved in the creation of the DSL, you know?
Yeah.
But most of the library, most of their underlying code is now Java, you know? And of course, they've been pushing the Kotlin story for quite some time. The latest version of Kotlin, rather of Gradle, 4.2, has a lot of support for building native apps. It's got parallel task execution for native compilation and linking tasks by default, all kinds of really great stuff. But it also has in it the new Kotlin DSL. I think they're at 0.11.1, and I get the feeling 1.0 is not far away. You know, it could be a matter of weeks, if not months, but could be before the end of the year. They're on Gradle Kotlin DSL 1.0.
Yeah, this is where they target, and it looks like they're very dedicated on this track. One of the tweets that I saw earlier, once the release was announced, is that JetBrains themselves now converted all their Gradle builds to be a Kotlin DSL and not a Groovy DSL, which of course makes sense for them as well.
Yeah.
And looks like this is the direction, and I think we can definitely move a Cradle to Kotlin podcast and rename it with a K, I guess.
Well, I suppose
that was a fun ride for a couple of years, and now it should be Cradle.
Well, I suppose that'll be Hadi Hariri and his Talking Kotlin podcast. They'll take over that stuff. I'll have to contact him about that. I mean, I still really like Gradle, and I still feel it is the debate between Gradle and Maven honestly should be over at this point. The performance of Gradle is so far superior, especially with the build cache involved and the build scans they put together and task avoidance and things like that. I mean, they show legitimate statistics where Gradle is 10 to 100 times faster than Maven in the vast majority of use cases. I think that anybody continuing to use Maven is simply just doing it out of legacy code or out of habit. It was funny. It came up on a no fluff expert panel, you know, which I always like to think of as the pretend to be an expert panel, you know, where we get up there and try to act like we know more than we do. At any rate, one of the guys went up and said, you know what, I just switched from Gradle back to Maven because he didn't want as many options. You know, he wanted it to be simpler. And immediately somebody else made the comment under his breath, yeah, Stockholm syndrome right there.
Yeah, so of course I agree with you, but just playing devil advocate here for a minute. There are certain circumstances in which the limitations of Maven and the I would say this lock-in is beneficial, right? So we spoke about it a number of times, and I spoke about it with Gradle guys as well. This argument pisses them off as expected, but not all the developers are as bright, as talented, and as caring as the developers in their leading show of accounts like Netflix and another company which by their logo probably should sell fruits, but they don't, and who else, LinkedIn, etc. There are a lot of developers that just don't care about this build stuff. They don't want to understand any DSLs. They don't want any power or flexibility in this area. All they want is just to do something quick and dirty, and those limitations of Maven that allow people to actually lock in the developers to not ruin anything and just doing simple stuff like adding the dependencies safely is I would say beneficial. And I think that the real popularity of Gradle will come not from Kotlin DSL but from this legacy enterprise mode, in which the only thing you will be able to do in your Gradle build is add dependencies and maybe add plugins.
I think that's certainly true. I certainly agree that you do get a bunch of people who usually have a title related to something like build master or whatever, that sometimes are dragged into that role and simply want something that's easy to maintain. They're not really interested in being developers and optimizing. I mean, as you say, at Netflix, when they do thousands of builds a day or even an hour sometimes, shaving a few microseconds off of each individual build adds up very quickly. But for the vast majority of use cases, that's more power and optimization than they often need. And yeah, I could see how they would often prefer a simpler solution. I think, of course, that's also partly why Gradle is favoring a Kotlin approach, because for people like that, the IDE support becomes very, very important. Whereas with really experienced developers, IDE support is a nice tool, but not really a reason to choose a build tool, which is that's a much richer domain to discuss. Yeah, I can see that. And it's never a bad thing to have more than one option, to have some competition in the marketplace. But I will be happier when Gradle dominates that marketplace instead of being, roughly even, or, whatever the actual market share is with Maven. Maven has just never been a terribly pleasant system to work with on many levels, and it'll just be a much easier developer experience when that's not the first choice for most developers.
And that's very interesting, because actually to get this level of confidence with Maven, and to say, okay, I know exactly how it works, I enjoy this closeness of the system, I enjoy those limitations, you actually need to understand it rather deeply. And it defeats the whole purpose of, you can start with Maven without getting into details, because that's exactly the opposite. You have to understand very, very deeply the system before you can say, okay, it's predictable, it's limited, I know exactly how it works, and I don't need anything else.
Well, if you're going to go to that level, then Gradle makes a lot more sense, especially because the people at Gradle Inc., are extremely clever developers, and they're working very, very hard. And the company seems to be doing well, and they're pushing hard on their enterprise, Gradle Enterprise product, which will add in all kinds of extra capabilities and stuff. So I think it's got a very rosy future. I mean, things look very promising that way, and we'll be keeping tabs on it for the next, however long we're doing this podcast, I think.
Yep.
The only question in my mind is how much of it really ties into Groovy anymore, and that just seems to be relatively small. Still, it's not like they're not supporting it, and it's not like there aren't literally tens of thousands of build files out there that have Groovy in them. I would still recommend for a new developer, if you're a developer at a company and they suddenly decide to adopt Gradle and you have to choose whether to learn Groovy or whether to learn Kotlin, I would still say it was worth learning Groovy at this point. But that's my own opinion on that, and that may change in a year. Who knows?
Yep. That's interesting, and I think that we see those drivers for Groovy adoption kind of come and go. Right, it was the novelty of Grails some time ago, which is not that hype anymore, and then it was Gradle that was a great driver for adoption of Groovy. And I think those days it is Jenkins, with Jenkins, the pipelines, which are all Groovy all scripts of Groovy, and we can see it from the questions on Stack Overflow. I'm sure you're following, as myself and all our 3 listeners follow Groovy questions on Stack Overflow, and they definitely you can see this shift from Grails to Gradle and now to Jenkins pipelines. And this is why people learn Groovy those days, which is okay as long as people do learn Groovy eventually.
That's interesting. I had noticed a lot of interest in Jenkins. That's been growing a lot over the years. It's kind of become the tool of choice in the CI space. But I've seen a lot of questions related to Gradle. I always get a question, does it support Gradle? And of course it does. I hadn't really thought of it as the driver for the adoption of Groovy. That if that's true, well, I mean, and I don't dispute that it is. I just hadn't thought about it that way. We'll see how long that lasts, whether that works as well. Of course, that brings us to one area that is working very, very hard to increase the adoption of everything Groovy related, and that is the Grails team. They have really stepped up their game in terms of marketing, I think. It's not just that they are making significant changes to Grails. I think the latest release that came out this week, as a matter of fact, was 3.3.1. That's just a bug fix over 3.3. 3.3 included the latest GORM capability, 6.1, and this event bus abstraction for reactive libraries and testing improvement for JSON views and many other things as well. So not only are they doing excellent work technically, this push with all the Gradle guides, and they're making a big marketing push for the G3 Summit, offering discount codes and everything. Jeff Brown has been giving very inexpensive training classes online through OCI as well. I really hope that this starts to really impact. I don't know right now what the impact is, but you can't fault the effort they're putting in. They really do seem to be doing the right things as heavily as they can.
Yep. And I think that it has to have impact, considering the size of their team and considering all the effort they put into Grails in terms of stability, in terms of innovation, and it's amazing every time I think about the team on OCI that works on Grails. I go back to this moment in time where, if you remember, Pivotal got rid of the Grails team, and we were like, will ever someone will work on Grails full time again? And now they're a team of 12 people more. Keep growing and doing amazing job, and that's everything is of course for the better. And look how that turned out.
Yeah, I think they're probably up to 15 now, and I
oh my
believe they're
god,
still hiring. Yeah, I mean, and they're working hard. Now it's not a huge number. I mean, when I visited, when I went to GreatConf in India, of course in Delhi, then the new company had hundreds of developers, and whole teams of people working on Grails applications. But to have the core team itself be 5 times the number of developers that they had at Pivotal,
Exactly.
I mean, it's a good thing, and I'm glad that they are not ignoring the marketing aspect of this. They seem to be pushing pretty hard and doing their best. We'll see how that plays out. I do have a lot of hope for it. I hope to keep pushing it as well, so that anybody who says, we've decided to use Spring Boot instead of Grails will someday realize that, yeah, you're now on the path to Grails. You've already done the infrastructure work. Now let's make your life easier,
Yep.
So,
by the way,
go ahead.
Going back to our Kotlin Gradle versus Maven discussion, we missed up opportunity to what kind of a build towards another great news on our list, and that's Gmaven Plus release. Right. So if you are if you are upset with Gradle because of their departure of Groovy, and you want to keep writing your build scripts in Groovy regardless of the underlying build tool.
I mean, if you're thinking of a Venn diagram of the people who listen to our podcast and the people who actually prefer to use Maven, I don't think that's a big number, Yeah, I did add in. There was a tweet about it that Gmaven Plus 1.6 is now available. Back in the day, long time ago, when I was originally writing Making Java Groovy, I had a chapter on build tools, and I looked at Gmaven. That's before Gmaven Plus came out, as well as even the Ant task for Gradle, for Groovy rather. I mean, that's how old that was. There were ways to work with Maven and Groovy. I have never tried Gmaven Plus. I don't have a lot of plans to do it. Have you ever tried anything like that? I guess that's more in your area.
Yeah, so I had the talk again many years ago, what probably will be like 7 years ago now, about the build tools landscape, and I tried both Gmaven and Gant back then. That was a very strange feeling. Obviously, Gmaven was more pleasant to work with than Maven, but one of the main points of Gradle, that it's not only about the XML, that problems are elsewhere, is obviously true. The downsides of Maven are not only the extremely verbose XML that tools like Gmaven try to find,
Yeah,
try to fight.
right. So, I mean, it's nice to be able to work with Groovy, but you're still working with Maven, right? I
Exactly.
totally
Yeah.
get that. But if anybody's interested, we did put the link in the show notes. You know, it is available there, and I imagine that somebody will send us a message saying, "Wait a minute, you forgot about us," and that's perfectly fine. We'll mention you on the next one, I suppose. Going back to the Grails one, though, one of the things I've been seeing a lot is they've been very good at producing these new guides. I just made a quick list of just the ones that have come out in the last few weeks. There was one today that I didn't add to the show notes that was about using dynamic finders, and that's pretty basic Grails. You know, that's been around since the beginning. But they've been spending a lot of time with the data sources with multi-tenancy. That was one of the big features out of 3.2, I think it was, and even pushed more with 3.3. Personally, I haven't worked on a project where I had to worry about multiple different clients operating in the same database, but if you have, that's a neat feature. They had some people that were very excited about the GORM support for GraphQL, the ability to work with graph databases, which of course are specifically helpful for example, social media applications, the friends of my friends kind of application. I've seen things like Neo4j used for that, but GraphQL support also being worked with GORM, that's a nice feature, and they have a guide on that too. Another guide that came out was the event-driven mechanism as well. Again, I haven't spent a lot of time with events, but with the whole world, the whole development world seeming to favor reactive approaches these days, having anything event-driven seems like a nice mechanism to support so that you can react when things change in the database. That's, by the way, that's always one of the problems when people say they're going to reactive streams or RxJava or anything like that, is that all of the existing JDBC drivers are blocking. You know, there aren't any reactive database drivers for relational databases. The only reactive drivers around are for the NoSQL databases like Mongo or Cassandra or Redis or things like that. So I imagine, I wonder if this Grails event mechanism is a workaround, if you will, a way to work with relational databases, but having things event-driven, and maybe as a way to help performance. Of course, I'm talking about an area I don't know much about, so I could be completely wrong about that. Is that something you've looked at all?
Yeah, no, not exactly, but you just mentioned about the blocking JDBC driver, and I try to recall, I think there are some efforts going on to develop a non-blocking JDBC driver that has nothing to do with Groovy. It's a Java effort, but this is something that I think is coming. I think there is a project dedicated to that in one of the GSRs for Java. So that's kind of a side note for that. For all
That's
that.
very important. I mean, it's an enabling technology, and as I say, there's a huge effort in the development world to go to reactive approaches, and if your remaining blocker is the JDBC driver, I'm not at all surprised that there's an effort to try to relax that restriction. That reminds me, of course, as long as we're talking about Grails, you know, Spring 5 is scheduled to be released next week. And
Yes.
the biggest change in Spring 5, of course, the one that's going to get all the publicity, is the adoption of reactive streams so that they can use, you know, reactive mechanisms inside their web layer, the so-called web flux module. I expect that this will have a large impact on Grails 3.4, presumably, unless they decide to wrap that into Grails 4.0. I'm not sure what the plans are for that. I also noticed, of course, that in Spring 5, that's the first version of Spring that's going to require adoption of Java 8 as a minimum JDK level, which I guess it's about time for that. We'll see how well that plays out in the industry. They have, I found it significant, of course, probably completely coincidental, that their big announcement after they release this, they're having a huge webinar where they demonstrate reactive springs and everything, and it's right in the middle of the Java 1 conference.
Yes.
Yeah, I imagine it's a coincidence, but who knows? We'll see. I'm looking forward to that, frankly, and I'm looking forward to Grails then scaling up to adopt that. But I imagine that'll mean then Grails will have to mandate Java 8 as a minimum, and I think that's the plan for Grails 3.4, but I don't know for sure. It's certainly the plan for 4.0, but it's probably for 3.4 as well.
I think if they are going to upgrade to Spring 5, they don't have much choice, do they?
Right, exactly. And again, it's a question of, how big a discriminator will that be in the marketplace when you have to draw that line? I know the Gradle people, by the way, are also going to mandate Java 8, but that won't happen until Gradle 5, I believe. Is that right? No, it might be 4. It might be 4.0. And I don't remember whether, right now they're on 3.4. Is that right? Just checking again. Yeah, no, 4. They're on 4.2, so it's got to be 5. Right. So it's got to be Gradle 5 that'll be the jump to Java 8, and I see the discussions going on. Of course, that leaves out another piece of news. As long as we're talking about Java for a moment, the other big thing that happened within the last week was the release of Java 9. Right?
Of course, yes.
Have you been involved in any of Java 9 for JFrog or for any of your systems?
Yeah, so we tried Java 9 back in the days where Jigsaw was actually breaking things, and expectedly it broke a lot of things. And now we are trying it on the release. It looks much better. There are some the usual catch-ups that need to happen, like ASM, for example, that need to be released before everybody can upgrade. But it looks good. They in this delay that they introduced in acceptance of Jigsaw, in which they reverted a couple of defaults to be more more backwards compatible, and I think more conservative. It actually helped a lot.
Well, the interesting thing to watch in Java 9 will be what the adoption path is. How many people are going to adopt and when. My sense is that a lot of people are going to take a wait and see about Java 9, because this move, of course, they say there's plenty of new features in addition to JPMS, the platform module system. But, but to be honest, no, there aren't. It's nice to have the native syntax for creating lists and maps, and it's nice to have the added features to streams and optional and a few others. But honestly, if it isn't for the module system, why are you upgrading? And if you're building an app from scratch and you don't need a whole bunch of third-party libraries, the module system is very easy, right? It really is not complicated. And the JVM has been modularized, the JDK, I should say.
Exactly.
That's perfectly fine. The place where it gets difficult is when you have to work with a third-party library that has not been modularized, and then you're winding up swimming in that whole complex issue of what are they called, unnamed modules and automatic modules and module path versus class path. And if you put a jar on the class path, is it still a module? And it's just, that's where all the chaos lies, right? Is that your experience as well?
Yeah. So that's exactly what the change that they introduced is so important, because they kind of said, okay, you know what, guys, we did it for the sake of modularizing the platform. It was very important and it was successfully achieved. And now, if you don't want to jump on this bandwagon with all the modularity, it will work just fine without it, and that's the big deal. And that's why I personally happy for the change that they made. And for example, it protected Groovy from a lot of unpleasant surprises, like discovering that you cannot access private variables anymore. and of course that's the bread and butter of Groovy development. So yeah.
Yeah, so they changed the fundamental nature of public and private, as you say, because if it's a module that has a package that is exported, you can see it, and if it hasn't been exported, you can't. So public and private now is a subset of that. You also can't have the same package in more than one module, which it brings up issues that come to inside of internals of Groovy as well. But, the Spring people seem to have adapted to it, and the Hibernate people say that they're ready for it as well. And those are two of the most used libraries in the Java world. I imagine Groovy will find their workarounds as well and ultimately fix that. I do hope to talk to some of the people like Cedric Champeau and stuff and see what the plans are for all of that. I know Gradle already works with Java 9, but it's not so simple because in order to do any kind of optimization, you've got to check inside those modules and see what they require and what they need. There's some real in-depth stuff is where life gets ugly. And honestly, if I was a company trying to decide, I would wait 6 months to a year before I would adopt Java 9 so that all these issues can be worked out by all the third-party libraries.
As usual, that's true for every major release of Java. It was the same with Java 8.
I am glad, however, that I did put a chapter in my book on some Java 9 recipes. Otherwise, I think everybody would have thought my book was out of date as soon as it was released. But I don't have anything earth-shattering in there, probably hurting sales this way. But then again, that would be assuming that anybody's listening to this. And, that's it's a very small number. Anything else about Grails, by the way? Again, I was mentioning a couple the Grails guides. They've got a guide on how to use Gorm with Ratpack so that you don't have to use Gorm with Grails. I still like the idea that Ratpack is growing in adoption. I don't, again, have any figures on that yet, but my just overall anecdotal evidence is that it is becoming a reasonably well-known alternative for RESTful web services, so that's good. And of course, their promises mechanism it's the best I've seen of any of the asynchronous processing mechanisms. The fact that they actually create the separate thread pool for blocking threads as opposed to non-blocking, and they manage everything so they can handle it all well. Your friend and mine, good old Dan Woods, has a whole chapter in the Learning Ratpack book on how they handle all of that. It's very elegant. I expect that while that itself is good, those techniques will also be adopted for the other APIs, Spring and etc. So at any rate, there is a Grails guide on building Ratpack with Gorm. There's a Grails guide on Grails promises. They've loaded multiple REST payloads in parallel, for example. They built that on another one that used a REST API with ersatz, that mocking HTTP library.
Oh yeah. This is great. I actually played with it, and both are very well written libraries. Both ersatz and HTTP builder ng.
Right, which leads to our other major release here is that it looks like HTTP builder ng actually went 1.0.
Yeah, and those are great news because we deserve a good HTTP builder in Groovy, and the original HTTP builder, while kind of pioneered the way of Groovy DSL for HTTP builder, wasn't that great. So a new rewrite is wonderful, and that's really good.
Yeah, we definitely want to congratulate them on actually going 1.0 and hope that people will give them a try, and let us know your experiences, whatever they might be. So that's there are many demos out there using HTTP Builder NG, next generation there. Very good, appropriate while we have a new Star Trek series as well. We have two new Star Trek series, don't we? Do you count the Orville as a Star Trek series?
Yeah, I think was the intention of the creators, right? They made every effort possible to mimic as closely as possible. So of course they deserve a try. No one said that they will be as good as, but we'll watch and see, I guess.
I have found that Orville show to be surprisingly watchable, actually.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm okay with it. And of course, Discovery just came out yesterday. So I saw that episode, but I'm not willing to spend money for CBS All Access or anything like that. So we'll see how that plays out. One more release that came out, CodeNarc went 1.0 also. So the static analysis tool for Groovy, CodeNarc, that is very popular among some developers. That one should be mentioned. And then GRU, G-R-U, the Groovy HTTP testing framework. That one's much earlier, but it's a nice little testing framework that looks like based on a Groovy DSL. Looks pretty cool. And I don't have it in here, but I definitely need to mention Andres Almire deserves some congratulations because Griffon turned 9 years old in the last couple of months. Yeah, it had its anniversary, and you and I, I'm sure, can remember to back before that was even a dream in somebody's eye, you know.
Yeah, and there are slight chance that we will depart from Griffon as we are now departing from Gradle because it supports apparently Kotlin now. So I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, well, you know, can't have everything, but what we can do to support those people is a good thing. You know, to support Griffon and to support Andres Almire anyway is always a good guy to support.
Until they go all the way Kotlin, and then it's for Hadi to grab.
Yeah, I mean, like you, I've been digging into Kotlin lately, and I still have very mixed feelings about it. I like what I've seen, but it still feels to me like it's Groovy, just, you know, with.
Yes.
Well, I actually have a terrible phrase I use for it occasionally, and I really shouldn't say this publicly because I'm going to get myself in trouble.
But you know, no one watches, so
yeah, no one cares. So yeah, I've been referring to it to friends as kind of Groovy for cowards. You know, it's like, if I'm afraid I'm ever going to get a null, or I'm afraid I'm ever going to not know the data type of something, I guess I'll go with Kotlin because that way I'll be safe. You know, because I'm so scared all the time. And like, come on, you know, like talk to some, you know. I mean, okay, the JavaScript people are all dynamically typed, but JavaScript's a scary language to code in at all, right? I think we'd all agree with that. The Python people, you know, everything they do is dynamically typed, and they don't seem to worry too much about it. In fact, they have a phrase in the Python world. They all go, we're all adults here. I mean, legitimately, they say that, you know, like, hey, it's stupid to do that, so don't do it, you know. Now, again, that's silly, but so be it. The Closure people, that everything there is dynamically typed, and they seem to be perfectly happy about it. But no, we're also scared that we'll get a null pointer exception that we got to enforce nullability at the compiler level. You know, we got to restrict everybody. We can't override. We got to go to static binding and everything because, well, you know, what happens if somebody overrides something and we didn't expect it? Well, that can't be good. It's like, come on, you know, relax, you know. But then again, I'm a Groovy developer, and I love optional typing. I love having static types if I know what they are. And for the edge cases where it helps not to know, I like def, you know. But all right, your mileage may vary. Still, the more I look at it, I do have to admit it is a very good language. You know, I'm very impressive, and I think they are going to make a huge impact in the Android community. They are already making a big impact.
They are. Yeah. And I spoke with JetBrains guys, and I cannot get into much details, but I think the general direction where Google is taking them is breathtaking. I think that Google seriously bet on them to solve their problems with Oracle regarding Java.
Interesting.
And that's a very long shot, obviously, but that's very well into the future. But if that's the case, I think they will. It's great for them, and they will have a lot of success there.
Well, and I also have to say, I mean, they've done a very good job with the language. I mean, it really is well done, and it's very pleasant to work with. But again, a lot of what I like about it is the stuff they kind of inherited from Groovy and from other places. But if you're going to lose out mind share to something, it might as well be something where the people are very pleasant and the technical abilities are very good, and the community is a very easy one to work with. I mean, it's good. I like the Groovy. You know, part of what has depressed me lately, other than the fact that everything I care about in the world is under assault at the moment, other than that, has been, the best thing about the Groovy ecosystem to me has always been the community. I have never met a group of people that are friendlier and easier to work with and more pleasant to deal with on everything. And if Groovy does not get the widespread adoption I think it deserves, I'm sad to see some of that go away, just because the sheer number of developers will be smaller, that fewer people will get the chance to work with such a great group of people. And that to me makes me sad, and I don't think there's anything I can do about it other than what I'm doing now. I mean, I'm still trying to bring it up to as many people as possible and show it off. And I still encounter people over and over again that go, wow, I didn't know it could do that. I didn't know it could do that, over and over, but it's hard fighting this battle, especially when the world is trying to destroy itself in the same process, A couple other minor things, whatever. One is, of course, the G3 Summit. You'll be at the G3 Summit, right?
No, I'm afraid it conflicts with Amazon reInvent.
Really?
I think so. Yeah, November 28th, December 1st is
Right.
exactly
the G3 Summit. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm checking.
I don't know what it conflicts with. I'll definitely be there. I'm looking forward to that. Most of the top names that I know will be there. I think Graham Roche is going to be there. I think Paul King. I think
yes, absolutely, by all means, all of them. reInvent is November 27th to December 1st. So that's 100% overlap.
Yeah, that's not a conference that I've needed to worry about much. Yeah, Venkat's going to be there. Josh Long, of course, from Spring. Zachary Klein. Sergio. Oh, good. Sergio Delamore will be there. Caballero. Ryan, of course. Vanderwolf. Dan's going to be there. Dan Wood's going to be there. I'm not so sure.
Okay, you see, that's why another reason I'm not going to.
Yeah, there's the downside. Right. Ivan Lopez as well. I guess on balance, it'll work out okay.
Yeah.
We'll definitely try to have a Groovy podcast from the conference then.
Yeah, no, but I really hope that from now all the way to December, we will have at least a couple of more.
Oh, yeah. Just mention in general. One other thing I want to point out for those people who are interested, our good friend Skulk Kronyi, excellent guy, excellent developer. He's giving an online class and learning Gradle plugin writing. So if you ever want to write a plugin for Gradle, of course, he's the author of a couple of LeanPub books on idiomatic Gradle. He's giving an online course September 28th and 29th. So that's the Thursday, Friday of this week, I believe. So we're getting in right on time to mention that. So I've got a link in the show notes on that. And I think that's about everything. Did you have anything else you wanted to bring up?
No, I think that's pretty much all. And it's good to be back. It's good to kick off the second season. I think we should restart the episode numbers, or do at least season 2, episode 1, and then in parentheses the total number.
Well, next episode is number 50.
So okay, so it will be
season
2. Season 2, episode 2, and then in parentheses 50 as total.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
We'll work that out. Again, just by way of marketing, I have to mention my book, Making Java Groovy.
Yes, you do that. You do that.
My new book is Modern Java Recipes. Okay, Modern Java Recipes. It is a book on what to do with the streams and lambdas and method references. I've also got a chapter in there on the java.time package, as well as things on completable futures and others. That's available from all the normal places. I got to say, just as an adventure, I did something which I tried last time and it was a disaster, but I tried it again. I went to my local Barnes & Noble. Okay, I've got one in Glastonbury, Connecticut, about half an hour away. And I told them I was a local author, and I got them to bring in a copy. So they ordered one copy and brought it in, and I signed it, and it's sitting on the shelf there. And I periodically go in and visit it and say hi like it's an orphan or whatever. Eventually, it will base it back to the company. But who knows? Maybe this time somebody will actually buy it, which would be very surprising, but nice and pleasant. I mean, I don't know if anybody buys technical books through Barnes and Noble, the physical bookstore.
Yeah, I don't know why someone will do that. Well, definitely for your signatures, but then there are other places when they can get it, like Java 1. And that's kind of, let's talk a little bit about that, because that will probably be when we will record our next podcast.
Oh, right. Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Since we'll both be there. Yeah,
of course, and there are a number of Groovy talks. If you just search for Groovy in your session catalog for Java 1, there are, I see now, 9 Groovy talks. Not a lot about Groovy itself. I don't know why this year it's so dry, and why the alternative languages track managers or track owners in the content committee kind of left us out for the dry. But of course, Guillaume will be there, and we'll talk about how Groovy, 14 years of Groovy, kind of influence other languages, including Java, but not only, also Swift and Kotlin and what's not. Dear Coin, of course, will be there and will deliver a talk about Groovy, your Groovy Kung Fu. That's a talk that he already did a couple of times and probably keeps getting better. Spock Talk by Ken Sipe, which is also great, and our humble efforts to sneak Groovy into the places where they didn't expect it to come as well. So a decent amount of Groovy content, maybe a little bit less than last year's, but we will take what we have, and I guess we can record a very nice Groovy podcast, at least with Dirk and Guillaume and Ken. So yeah, expect season 2, episode 2, and 50 in total at Java 1.
Right, and then we'll be back on schedule again. Okay, well, it's great to see you again. Nice talking to you. Hope everything works out well for you in the next couple weeks. And I'll see you at Java 1.
Oh, yes, absolutely. See you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.